An 8-year-old girl's simple question silenced a crowded town hall and left Donald Trump sharing a deeply personal story about faith loss and redemption. What happened next moved everyone to tears. The church fellowship hall in Shreveport, Louisiana buzzed softly with the sound of folding chairs scraping against the polished floor and murmured conversations. The space usually reserved for Sunday potlucks and Bible study had taken on an unusual air. That evening at the front of the room stood Donald Trump, his unmistakable presence filling the modest hall. His orange-tinted complexion and signature hand gestures were familiar to everyone, but tonight he was uncharacteristically subdued. Perhaps sensing the gravity of the event, the audience was a mix of families, retirees, and local residents, curious to hear what he had to say. But among the crowd, there was one figure who seemed out of place, not because of her size, but because of her quiet intensity. 8-year-old Lily, dressed in her best Sunday dress, clutched an old leather-bound Bible to her chest. It was a treasure passed down from her late grandmother, its pages worn and its gold lettering faded. Her mother, seated beside her, had whispered before they arrived, "You can ask him, but only if you're brave enough, and only if you truly mean it." Lily had nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been rehearsing her question for weeks, scribbling it out in her notebook during recess, and murmuring it to herself as she lay in bed at night. It wasn't a question born from childish curiosity, but one that weighed on her soul as the evening progressed. Trump spoke about his usual topics: policies, achievements, and the future of America. The crowd occasionally clapped or nodded in agreement, but the energy was tepid compared to his usual rallies. Lily waited, her small hands gripping the edges of her Bible tighter with each passing minute. Finally, the floor opened for questions. A line quickly formed, with adults eagerly stepping forward to ask about local issues, national policies, and even a few compliments about his iconic red tie. Lily hesitated, her tiny frame shrinking further into her seat. But when her mother gave her a subtle nudge, she knew it was her moment. Her legs felt wobbly as she stood, her heart thundering so loudly she was certain the entire room could hear it. The line seemed endless, but as she inched forward, the room's chatter began to fade. People noticed her. The small girl with the oversized Bible clutched tightly to her chest. Whispers rippled through the crowd when her turn came. Trump looked down at her, his expression momentarily softening. "And what's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Lily swallowed hard, gripping her Bible so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, with a voice that trembled but refused to break, she asked the question that had been echoing in her heart for months. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" The room fell into an immediate and complete silence. Eyes darted between the girl and Trump, the weight of her question pressing down on everyone like a tangible force for a man known for his rapid-fire answers. Trump didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at her, then at the Bible in her hands, and something in his demeanor shifted. But before he could speak, the air in the room seemed to thicken with expectation, drawing everyone to the edge of their seats. Trump's silence was almost deafening for a man who had built his career on quick comebacks and unwavering confidence. This pause felt unusual. He stared at Lily for a long moment, his usual bravado replaced by something softer. Almost vulnerable, the Bible she clutched caught his eye again, and his lips parted. But no words came. Lily shifted slightly, her small frame looking even more fragile under the room's collective gaze. Her question had not been meant to challenge or provoke. It had been honest, born from a deep yearning to understand something larger than herself, and somehow, that sincerity was louder than any political debate or shouted slogan. The crowd remained hushed. Even the creaking of chairs or the muffled cough seemed to vanish as though the very air was holding its breath. Trump finally raised his hand slightly as if to steady himself and leaned against the podium. "That's a big question." He began, his voice lower and steadier than usual. "And it's not one I've always had the answer to." The admission surprised many. Trump, known for his unshakable confidence, was admitting uncertainty in front of a crowd. He looked back at Lily, and his expression shifted again, this time to something almost paternal. "When I was about your age," he continued, "I had a lot of questions about God, too. My parents would take me to church every Sunday. I remember sitting in those pews staring at the stained glass windows, wondering if God was even listening to me. He paused again this time, glancing out at the audience as though gauging their reaction. His hand rested on the edge of the podium, fingers tapping lightly against the wood. My father used to tell me, he went on, that faith is like a ladder. You climb it one step at a time, and sometimes you're afraid you'll fall. But you keep climbing because there's something up there worth reaching for at the time. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was just something he said to keep me quiet. A faint chuckle rippled through the audience, breaking the tension just slightly. Lily, however, didn't smile. Her eyes remained fixed on him, waiting for the real answer she had asked for. Trump leaned forward slightly, his tone softening even more. But as I got older, life threw a lot of challenges my way. I faced losses, failures, and moments where I wasn't sure if I could keep going. In those times, I didn't always feel like God was with me. Sometimes I was angry at him. Other times I thought, maybe he'd given up on me altogether. The room remained captivated. It wasn't the usual polished rhetoric or rehearsed lines they were used to hearing. This was something raw, something real. But I'll tell you this, Trump said, his voice firming up slightly. Even in my worst moments when I thought I was alone, I realized that faith wasn't about always having the answers. It's about believing that even when you don't see the whole picture, there's a purpose. There's something greater at work. He glanced back at Lily, whose grip on the Bible had loosened slightly. Her wide eyes glistened under the fluorescent lights. And God, to me, he said slowly, is that purpose. He's the reminder that even when we fall, even when we fail, we're not done. He's the one who keeps telling us to climb the ladder, even when it feels like it's going to break. But before the weight of his words could fully sink in, Lily's eyes welled up with tears, and the crowd began murmuring softly, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Lily's tears came quietly, at first a single drop sliding down her cheek as she clutched her grandmother's Bible tighter against her chest. But then as Trump's words lingered in the air, her shoulders began to tremble. The crowd noticed their whispers growing louder, yet no one dared interrupt the moment her mother leaned over, instinctively placing a comforting hand on her back. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered softly, but Lily shook her head. This wasn't sadness. It was something far deeper. Trump had spoken words she hadn't known she needed to hear. And in doing so, he had touched a part of her young heart she had long guarded. Trump seemed to notice her reaction and took a step away from the podium, his face characteristically subdued. "What's your name?" he asked gently, Lily. She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a beautiful name," he said with a faint smile. "You know, Lily, sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest ones to answer, and sometimes those questions remind us of what really matters." Lily nodded, her tear-filled eyes never leaving his. "My grandma used to say that too," she said softly. "She said God is always listening, even when you don't hear him." Trump's expression flickered with something unspoken, a mix of admiration and understanding. He took a deep breath, turning his attention back to the crowd. "You know, this little girl just asked a question that most adults are too afraid to ask. What does God mean to us?" It's not an easy question because it makes us look inward. It makes us face our fears, our doubts, and our flaws. The room was utterly still, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone for a moment. It felt as though Lily wasn't just a little girl with a Bible. She was a symbol of something much bigger. Her courage had shifted the tone of the entire evening, transforming it from a routine town hall into a deeply personal reflection on faith and humanity. Trump continued, his voice steady but softer than before. "We live in a world where we're always looking for answers outside of ourselves. We think power, success, or money will fill the gaps. But they don't. The real answers are the ones that make us uncomfortable. The ones that make us ask, what do I stand for? What do I believe in? And who am I when no one else is looking?" He paused, his gaze returning to Lily. "Thank you for reminding me of that, Lily. You're wiser than most adults." I know. The crowd erupted into soft applause, but Lily didn't seem to notice.